Well, welcome to Theater of the Mind, Rupert. It's great to have you here.
Good to be there.
Yeah. So I thought we could talk about morphic fields today. And what exactly are morphic fields and how do they work?
The word morphic comes from the Greek word morphe, which means form. And morphic fields are fields that give form, shape, structure, or organization to things. We often hear people say that the whole is more than the sum of the parts. When you're looking at an organism, the whole is more than the sum of the organs. When you're looking at a society, the whole is more than just the individuals in it. So what does this wholeness that's more than the sum of the parts mean? Well, I think that it's the morphic field that makes wholes more than the sum of the parts. The whole system has a field. So a flock of birds, for example, which can turn almost like a single organism, with all the individual birds can turn at almost the same time without bumping into each other. That's an example of a morphic field of the flock that organizes the whole system. The morphic field of a developing embryo organizes the embryo as it grows. It helps the organs to know where to develop. It helps the fingers to form in the right place, and the bones and the muscles in the arms and the legs, and so forth. So they're organizing fields that bring together and coordinate all the different parts that lie within them.
So is it like an energetic blueprint?
Yes, it is. It's like a blueprint. What they do is organize the way these energetic systems relate to each other. It is a kind of blueprint of the organism. So the morphic fields that organize developing organisms are called morphogenetic fields. They're fields to do with the coming into being of form. And the morphogenetic field of the arm is like an arm blueprint, and the morphogenetic field of the leg is like a leg blueprint that organize the developing tissues.
I have a friend who has a amputated limb, and he always has that phantom limb experience. Is that because of the morphic field?
I think it is, yes. I think that you have a field for each. All of us have a field for our limbs. If you lose the actual limb, as people do when it's amputated, the field still remains there. And in some animals, like newts, for example, if you cut the leg off a newt or a salamander, it can grow a whole new leg. I think that's because it has a field for the leg. We have the field, but for some reason human beings don't regenerate entire legs or arms. Nevertheless, I think the field of the limb is there, and I think that's what people with phantom limbs are actually feeling. I think the field is where the arm seems to be in an amputee. I mean, almost everyone who has an amputated arm or leg has a phantom limb. So I think that's what the phantom is, yes.
And how do you measure the fields? Is that might be a little far out?
You can measure these fields through their effects. You measure gravitational fields through gravitational effects, electric fields through electric effects, and you measure morphic fields through morphic effects. And there's a variety of ways you can do this. But since we're talking about phantom limbs, I'll mention one of the experiments I used for that. Phantom limbs, being phantoms, go through solid objects. When people have a phantom arm or a phantom leg, they can push it through a wall or a chair or a desk or whatever, because being a phantom, it's not blocked by normal material substances. So in I have some very, very simple experiments to test for these fields, and there's one of them that I've been doing recently with people with phantom arms. They stand outside a door, a normal wood door. We mark out 6 panels on the door, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The person behind the door, with the door shut, with one of my colleagues, puts their arm through a randomly selected panel. They throw a dice. If the dice says 4, then they push their phantom arm through panel number 4. Then on the other side, we have people who are skilled in energetic medicine of various kinds, Reiki and so forth, therapeutic touch. And we ask them to feel where the phantom limb is. Which of these 6 positions can they feel the phantom sticking through, if they can? And if they were just guessing, they'd be right one time in 6. Well, some of our more skilled practitioners are doing much better than that. Instead of a success rate of 1/6, they're getting success rates of closer to a half or over a half,
wow.
which is very significant statistically. They're not getting it right every time, but of course nobody's used to doing this kind of experiment. We're asking people to do something very unusual.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, this kind of brings me to the next question. You wrote that morphic resonance involves a kind of action at a distance in both time and space. How does that work?
Well, one aspect of the morphic fields I haven't mentioned yet is that they evolve. So the morphic fields that govern human arms and legs haven't always been that way, because human beings haven't always been the way they are. So the fields themselves must change in time. They develop, they evolve. And I think they're inherited through a process I call morphic resonance. A morphic resonance involves similar things influencing subsequent similar things across time and space. And that's what I meant by a kind of action at a distance in time or space. It's probably easier to illustrate this by talking of behavioral examples. For example, if a rat learns a new trick in Santa Fe, then just because that rat's learned it, it should be easier by morphic resonance for rats of a similar breed to learn the same trick all over the world.
Right, like that 100th monkey thing, right?
Yes, it's a kind of collective memory thing.
Mm-hmm.
The 100th monkey example isn't terribly well documented, and I don't usually use that, but the 1000th rat is well documented by proper scientific papers, with experiments done at Harvard and in Edinburgh and in Australia. And there's now good evidence that rats do in fact learn more quickly what rats have learned elsewhere, in a way that can't be explained by any normal conventional scientific means. So it is a kind of collective memory that each species has, and each member of the species draws on it and in turn contributes to it.
And there's a point of critical mass.
Well, I don't think critical mass is probably the right concept, because what that implies is some kind of step function. Up to a certain point, nothing happens, then everything happens.
Mm-hmm.
It's more a kind of gradual process. If 100 rats have learned it in Santa Fe, it'll be that bit easier. If 1,000 rats have learned it, it'll be much easier still. So it's not as if you get up to 999, nothing happens, and then suddenly every rat in the world is doing it. The 100th monkey story sometimes gives people the impression that there's a kind of critical mass. But that story, which was originally put forward by Lyle Watson in his book Lifetide, he makes it clear in the original version of the 100th monkey story that's not what he meant. He said, let us imagine that at a particular moment another monkey, say the 100th, learns it, then it starts happening everywhere else. All the evidence was that monkeys on some islands learned to wash sweet potatoes after monkeys on another island near Japan had done so. The behavior spread, that's all we know.
Right.
Not that it suddenly spread at a particular moment. So I think the critical mass idea is a bit misleading, and I never use that. I think it's a much more gradual process.
Mm-hmm. I know I read somewhere that you wrote that once something happens, it's most likely it will happen again. So it's more just once the pattern has been created, it will occur again.
Yes, well, not necessarily. The more often it happens, the more likely it is to occur again. If it's just happened once, it may still be pretty unlikely, but if it's happened millions of times, it gets more likely. So it's really a principle of habit. Morphic resonance is like habits of nature. And in fact, the subtitle of my main book on this, which is called The Presence of the Past, is subtitled Morphic Resonance and the Habits of Nature. What this principle means is that nature builds up habits. Through repetition, things become more probable, more likely to happen again. So it really is just the same as habits that we actually experience in our own lives and see in the animals that we know.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so morphic fields have a memory, right?
Yeah.
Is there a connection between morphic fields and precognition or past life recall? How do you explain that?
Well, not with precognition. I think precognition can happen, but morphic resonance doesn't explain it because it comes from the past, according to my hypothesis. So, precognition is still a mystery from this point of view.
Okay.
What morphic resonance does help to explain is memory. it explains collective memory. It even explains individual memory.
Well, welcome to Theater of the Mind, Rupert. It's great to have you here.
Good to be there.
Yeah. So I thought we could talk about morphic fields today. And what exactly are morphic fields and how do they work?
The word morphic comes from the Greek word morphe, which means form. And morphic fields are fields that give form, shape, structure, or organization to things. We often hear people say that the whole is more than the sum of the parts. When you're looking at an organism, the whole is more than the sum of the organs. When you're looking at a society, the whole is more than just the individuals in it. So what does this wholeness that's more than the sum of the parts mean? Well, I think that it's the morphic field that makes wholes more than the sum of the parts. The whole system has a field. So a flock of birds, for example, which can turn almost like a single organism, with all the individual birds can turn at almost the same time without bumping into each other. That's an example of a morphic field of the flock that organizes the whole system. The morphic lie within them.
So is it like an energetic blueprint?
Yes, it is. It's like a blueprint. What they do is organize the way these energetic systems relate to each other. It is a kind of blueprint of the organism. So the morphic fields that organize the field of a developing embryo organizes the embryo as it grows. It helps the organs to know where to develop. It helps the fingers to form in the right place, and the bones and the muscles in the arms and the legs, and so forth. So they're organizing fields that bring together and coordinate all the different parts that